So often I hear stories of people who are incredibly socially isolated. So much so that when misfortune comes, usually in a time of bad health, some other disaster, they can't name a single person in their world who would be able to lend a hand. Although they have been managing just fine up until that point, they suddenly realize that they are devastatingly alone in the world. They have no one to comfort them, no one who would take their side, no one who would speak up for them, no one to keep them warm, no one to help them up when they fell. I'm talking about a kind of aloneness that goes beyond the circumstances imagined by that commercial for that fall alert device. You'll remember the ad, help, help, I've fallen and I can't get up. No, I'm thinking about situations where people have been so estranged from their families, from their friends, that they have no one at all. The human being that they may have the most profound relationship may be their regular taxi driver. They have no one who would care if they fell. They have no one who would notice if they died. I think that this has to be the saddest thing. This is a product of a life disconnected from others. But it doesn't have to be this way. In fact, it doesn't start out this way. We've had the perfect opportunity to begin lessons in community from birth. You've heard the expression, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, most anyone who has been a parent knows that that is absolutely true. Anyone who has been there knows that parenting is really hard. In the words of the sage, you can easily break one cord. And if you're doing it on your own, you know that you can easily reach that snapping point when you feel stretched to your limits with no one to help. But when there's two, at least you can tag team. You can have a rest while the other person manages the chaos. You're stronger with two. But when you have a team of 3 or 4 or 20, your cord is strong. You are far more resilient. It's not only a mom or a dad who nurtures a child, but also a grandma who might know what to do about an earache or to decide whether or not that rash is heat rash or maybe measles. It's also a grandpa who shows little people when a tomato is ripe enough to eat, or an auntie or an uncle who lends advice about fashion or music or love. It's the block parent on the street who keeps an ear out for kids in trouble on their way home from school. It's teachers. It's a neighbor who's willing to watch the kids for a little bit every day so the parents can work. It's school crossing guards who high-five the kids at the end of the day. It's convenience store owners who reinforce lessons in honesty. And it's also pastors who have the privilege of teaching a child from an early age that they are part of the family of God. We learn from many, many people as we grow. We don't grow in isolation. So my question is this: why is it that as we age, we are more and more reluctant to ask for help? Well, it's right there in the Bible. Some people would have you believe that the Hebrew people wandered in the desert for 40 years before they finally broke down and asked for directions to the Promised Land. We are so darn proud of our independence that we may find it even hard to ask God for help. We too often, like Mr. Rogers, persist in doing something alone that would have been much more easy if two people were doing it together. True independence, I think, is an illusion. There will come a time in each life when we need help. I can never quite shake that image that Jesus gives in John 21:18 of that inevitable slide into old age, when he says, "Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and you went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you don't want to go." Like it or not, we all need help. Even the old man in the woods still needs to go into town for the things he can't make himself. Now, you may not be a terribly gregarious people person. In fact, you may not like many people at all, but I can be fairly sure that you too will have people in your life, people you've chosen, people you love. Tough to admit, but you might actually find you need them too. The Apostle Paul talks about our interdependence with each other as a good thing, like many parts that go into making up one body. He would say, what good is a foot without a leg? What good is a nose without a face to put it on? We need each other to be complete. Paul goes on to imply that because we all belong to the same body, no one part is better or worse or more important than another. We all work together to serve Christ, who is both our heart and our head. Together, we can do anything. Together, we can stand. If two or more stand together, they are less easy to be overpowered, says the sage. Three or more joining together becomes a force to be reckoned with. We found that to be true as people have raised their voices in recent support of issues like Black Lives Matter, protesting injustice, standing for the oppressed, marching, preaching, speaking out. I found myself wondering why that movement came together so strongly this summer. I mean, certainly there have been times in recent years when other unjust killings should have stirred people up and called them to action, should have brought them out onto the streets. I wonder if the difference this time actually was the pandemic. I know that might sound strange, but in these last few months, humanity has gone through something pretty traumatic together. We had largely agreed to keep ourselves and our neighbors safe by self-isolating, and it was a significant time of self-sacrifice, putting others before yourself. It didn't start out that way. If we roll back the video to 3 months or so ago, we get a very different picture, a snapshot of people who weren't being very friendly. In fact, they were caught up mostly in just being afraid. New York Times opinion columnist David Brooks wrote an article in early March 2020 titled, "Pandemics Kill Compassion Too." He was warning back then that we were not going to like who we would become in these trying times ahead. Certainly, the early days of hoarding toilet paper and Lysol wipes and hand sanitizer seemed to bear that prediction out. Fear of lack initially made many people selfish and greedy. But then, something remarkable happened. People started helping each other rather than simply stay looking out for number one. Neighbors reached out to the elderly on their street, arranging to do groceries for them. Some even rigged up a system to show whether they were okay or not from a distance. There would be a sign in the window. Green meant I'm okay. Yellow meant I need something, please. And red meant I'm in trouble, please come and help. People went out of their way to help each other. Even though we were wearing masks, somehow we saw each other better. Maybe we were seeing each other for the first time. A chaplain friend of mine, Donna, wrote this recently about the way the pandemic changed those of us providing spiritual care in hospitals. She wrote, "During the pandemic, all of us have been living in this imposed isolation. And this experience aligned in me, in many ways, with some of our patients who live in isolation all of the time. I have come to appreciate a little better the difficulty and the struggle that comes with that. It makes me ask the question, how can we hold on to that learning and consider even better ways that we can care for people who live in isolation every day?"